of the aquarium, and they're the folks kind of creating the content for our blogs. And it's something that we've told them to, you have a great idea, you want to talk about this balloon fish, treatment that you're doing, and you need to think about how you're going to tell the story through images. You need to get the pictures, and we almost encourage them not to go on for pages and pages of text, because you're going to lose people. And if they do, that's fine. We need to put a picture at the top to draw people in. That's just been my experience. So.
There's some bloggers that I know Laura in particular is a big fan of the long form blog post. But personally, as somebody who cares and worries about images, I always find that we all like to read a good long novel, I think, or a good long book. But the cover does still matter, and it's definitely a hook that can draw you in right at the beginning. And I think that's sort of what we're talking about is how do you effectively do that. I might dive in with a quick example. I'm not going to name the blogs I saw it on or anything like that, but I got in a discussion with a few people on Twitter about there was a site that had it was debunking 8 myths about vaccines and debunking the idea that there was certain things wrong with vaccines. And it was sort of, it's one of the ones that's fighting a good fight against anti-vax and was very pro-health and these things. And, I looked at it and I was looking at the blog post and I was like, well, all the images, I think there was about 3 or 4 images that were very clinically blue-tinted, up-close shots of needles. No people, fuzzy, out-of-focus background hospital settings, and needles. One of them was an array of needles, and another one was an up-close shot of a needle with liquid in it. And it was a hey, shots are safe, go get your shot, kind of a blog post, which is a good message I'm fully in support of, but irrelevant to whether you are or not. The message, I think, was, I know a lot of people who don't regularly get their vaccines for a variety of reasons, and they're, it sounds silly, but being scared of needles is one of the reasons. And, so to me that was just, we had this discussion on Twitter, and I was saying, well, this is a fail. On Twitter you're short and you're blunt with this. This is a fail. The images are not effective in this case. And the person, somebody who I don't think worked at the site, but was saying, well, what would have been effective? I said, smiling happy kids would have been more effective, in my opinion, than shots of needles. And they said, well, it's really hard to find anything medical that's an open source or royalty-free image that you can quickly put on a blog that has to do with health. And I said, well, maybe that's not true. There's a lot of different sites that you can go to find artists that might be willing to have their work used for something like that, either for free or for a small fee or whatever, to help a blog post like that, especially if it's something that they agree with. So, and then the discussion to where are these sites and this kind of thing. And that's partly, why I was interested in this session today, was so we could talk about that type of thing. So everybody, the needle example, I think to me that feels fairly clear. It was, big scary needle is not usually the best way to get somebody to go to the doctor's office with a child and, get one in there. And you had some examples from
From our aquarium, we have some examples, and this is probably preaching to the choir, but there's the big wall of text. So we have right whale researchers up in Maine. They go up there every summer, and they're doing fantastic work, and they spend a lot of time blogging. They do a lot of text often, but I wanted to, this is an example. It's just a screen grab, but this is the whole blog post. This is just the sidebar. It's all text, and the message was about how they saw balloons out there, and a lot of marine animals will meet their death if they swallow a balloon or whatnot. This has no pictures. We also had no reader interaction. There was no comments or anything. And then the next blog that I'm going to show you came many months later, but this was the same message, but they included 3 pictures. I don't have all of it in here. We can certainly follow the link if you want to see all the pictures, but it started out first with blooms. It gave the blog context. It also, what the heck is that? And so hopefully it drew people into the story to read further, and that's the goal of the pictures for us, is to kind of entice them into the blog to read more and get our message out about marine conservation or whatever it is. It could be a research project or something like that. So this is just one small example of how the blogs were improved with images, but yeah.
So does your aquarium have a budget for images that they use, or you're paying these photographers?
No, actually,
or they're stocking?
Our researchers all go out there with cameras, and it's sorry. And that's, I guess, one way that we do it. The aquarists, the researchers, the biologists are taking most of their own images. Granted, they're not amazing all the time, but sometimes that doesn't matter if it's in the moment and it's something that's, a lot of the stuff is weird enough, it doesn't matter. The image quality it's going to hook someone in there. And certainly we can get in later about the other places that we get images, but most of the images on our blogs come from the author of the blog or someone at the aquarium. When it's someone at the aquarium, we don't credit them, and the same with we do for our cricketarians. If it's kind of a home aquarium grown piece of photography, we don't usually credit. It's just assumed that it's someone at the aquarium. So, I mean, if you peter around the regular blog, you'll notice that a lot of they do have credits for some of them, and that's because it's required by law, like they're under federal regulations that they have to say this was taken under permit XYZ because they're closer marine mammals. But that's kind of a unique situation for the images.
So for those who, for bloggers who don't generate their own images, what sites do you usually refer people to when they ask where can they find images?
Where can they find images? I think there's a couple ways to go about it. In my opinion, one of the most effective ways is to find somebody and start working with them, so that if you're always posting on the same topic and you happen to notice that maybe there's a Flickr or a DeviantArt account or just an artist's blog or something like that you're aware of that's on that topic, one of the most effective ways you can do that is get in touch with the person and see if you can work something out with them regularly, instead of just doing it on the fly, grabbing random things. There's to back up a bit. I mean, there's sites like the number one sin, as far as I'm concerned, when people are blogging that drives me absolutely crazy is, and I'm trying to find ways to be polite about it when I comment on, but there is, I always come off sounding like a snarky little, pet project, but is when people say image from Google Images, or they say image from Wikimedia Commons. Even though Wikimedia Commons, I mean, that's legitimate. I mean, it's first of all, just to be clear, because not everybody knows this, and that's fair enough that they don't. Image from Google Images. Google doesn't get permission from anybody to catalog what they give people back in a search. And they do say right at the top of the page, images on Google Images may be under copyright. You're supposed to follow the link, figure out who owns the image, and behave accordingly. If it's a Wikimedia Commons, Wikimedia does require that people have those images to be completely 100% open source. But the person who uploaded the image to Wikimedia Commons might not care, and might not have done it correctly. So that's sometimes, unfortunately, a wrinkle. I don't think they really have been particularly vetting those. I think it's usually the person who made the image originally who might go, what the heck is my thing doing there? And then they contact Wikimedia and ask them to take it down. So Wikimedia Commons is not always the best way to go. And personally, if you're citing Wikimedia Commons, what I would strongly recommend you do is you don't just say, image from Wikimedia Commons. Link back to the user who put it on. You can sort of go down a couple of levels on there and find who uploaded it and when. And link it back down a couple. Because then you're crediting the source, in my opinion, and you're not crediting, saying image from Google Images or image from Wikimedia Commons is kind of, image from North America. It's just sort of this big, broad link. So in that general sense, when you're looking for stuff, you can look for those. In one of the other sessions on digital rights, they were talking about that you can do a Google search for Creative Commons images. How many people feel that they're pretty familiar with what Creative Commons is? Not too bad? Okay. Creative Commons, can I go off on that for a minute? Is that all right?
Yeah.
And anybody chime in too if you have a different opinion, but Creative Commons, basically, in the world we have a set of copyright laws. Most of them are written under something called the Berne Convention. You can read it, it's very long and dry, but it's been around for a long time. How copyright works is a lot of misconceptions because there's a lot of other terms like registered copyright and trademarks and things. But generally speaking, when somebody creates an image, if you sit down and draw something, whatever it is, or take a photo, you own it. You don't have to mail it to yourself or anything. You own the copyright the moment you've created something. But you cannot copyright an idea. I do a lot of winged trilobites. That's sort of my little tag that I do in a lot of my paintings and things. For various reasons, that probably seem crazy. But the thing with winged trilobites is I can't own a copyright on the idea of winged trilobites. And, much to my shock and chagrin in a world of 7 billion people, shortly after I launched my blog, a few people were like, oh, do you read this? Do you read this? Because there was other sites that also had winged trilobites. And so copyright is not for an idea. Copyright is for the physical, actual product that you've made. There are other things you can do to sort of legally protect it. You can pay into trademarks. You can do different things like that to sort of protect derivative images. You want to stay away from directly copying somebody else's work and repainting it is what they call a derivative work. So you've kind of violated their copyright by making a reproduction if it's too close. So that's sort of copyright. Creative Commons, as was said in another session, and this is a good way to put it, sits sort of on top of that. And it's a way of allowing people to share images online and sort of say, here's some ground rules of what I prefer you do with my image. If you see something's Creative Commons, that's not one thing. There's, I think, 7 different Creative Commons licenses. So it's important that you read which one it is. But the one thing they all have in common is that you have to attribute the original artist. So you might be free to pull it for your blog post, but no matter what else happens, you're going to have to at least put a link in their name back to the site of the person who made it. The most restrictive one is the one that I tend to use on Creative Commons. So I won't go through all 7, but just to mention that one. It's non-derivative, no commercial. So when somebody uses my work on a blog post, and any of you would be free to do so under Creative Commons, you need to link and attribute it to me. You cannot do it for the purpose of selling a bunch of t-shirts with my stuff on it, because that would be commercial, and that's not cool. And you can't sort of make a derivative work on it and start, I don't know, putting mustaches on all the trilobites or something like that, and making a mockery of it, or whatever, something like that. So that's the most restrictive Creative Commons one. But if you wanted to take a Creative Commons image using that license that I have and just repost it, have at it. And but not all artists choose to do that. And there's sort of a social contract that I think with the internet, a lot of us, everybody's been following SOPA a little bit. Is aware of SOPA. The way that I liked, was it Alex Wilde on the network was writing about it. Alex Wilde is an insect photographer that writes for Scientific American at Compound Eye, and I think the phrase he used was, it was nuking the infrastructure of the internet to deal with piracy. And I don't like when somebody pirates my image and doesn't attribute it correctly. It drives me nuts. But SOPA is a bad law. It allows people to shut down entire websites based on the accusation of piracy. So, anyway, so that's kind of a bit about where to find them. I'll just quickly say, if you're looking for artists and you want to find some, and again, they're all going to be different. There's not one set of rules on these sites, so you have to negotiate with the person. Fantastic places to find science-based art. That would be great for outreach and communication. There's obviously a lot of photographers, mainly on Flickr, although there are some artists there as well. And they often have groups, so you can go through the groups and try to find things by topic that way. And I don't know if everybody's aware of DeviantArt.com. That's a creepy name, DeviantArt. But DeviantArt.com is this gigantic, gigantic site that has, I think when I was looking at some stats on it recently, it was something like 40 million users and 100 million images or something. Probably 90% of those are high school students doing anime doodles on a notebook or putting them up. But there are some fantastic groups. There's a bioscience group. There's a whole bunch of paleo groups on there. And there's a lot of very serious and amateur artists, cartoonists, painters, digital artists. There's entire groups to all those whacked out people that like fractals. And so you can find a lot of things on there, and on DeviantArt, often they will say whether or not they're Creative Commons right on the page. And I found the DeviantArt community is very friendly. You know, there's been a few times we've used their images on Symbiotic. I put them up, and you know, I just send the person a message. And we put your image up.
I'm going to write that down. Will you just tell me how to...
Oh, it's just the word deviantart.com. So that's a great spot to... you can say more about it than I can about the GNSI.
Right.
Yeah.
So the other thing, which I'm not sure how useful it is for someone who's just thrown off a blog post, wants to get it done in, you know, an hour, is not getting paid for this, whatever, but there are places where you can commission real science illustrators to do incredible work. And the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators is kind of a hotspot for those folks. They also have, you can find them at gnsi.org. And they have a portfolio website where a lot of members have posted their work. And you can, if you have a budget for images, you can go there and you can, a lot of people will relicense their work for very small fees. Basically, I think there's probably an unfortunate perception in the writing community that I can't afford images. I need to find them that are free. A lot of times, all it takes is reaching out to the artist. You know, we're trying to make our mark and our living as well. And if we see value in the project that you're doing, and we have pet projects as well that we really care about. So if you approach us and say, hey, you know, I really value your work. I'd like to use an image. I think it goes really well with my post. This is my cause, or this is my idea, or these are the people I'm trying to reach. I'm happy to plug you. You know, we're happy to work with you. So don't feel like if you go to a site like, you know, like a professional illustrator, like a GNSI or something, that you will automatically be like, that'll be $8,000, please. You know,
I tried that.
We're all, I think, kind of reeling in this internet age of how are we going to make a living, and we want to work with the writers, the image makers want to work with the writers to figure it all out. And we know that a lot of the blogging work is done on your own time. So there, I guess what I'm saying is don't be afraid to start a conversation and approach an artist whose work you really like. That said, this site that I will also write up on there is called science-art.com. It's a portfolio site where professional illustrators go and upload their portfolios. So if you have a project with a budget for images, you can sort through, find a style that you like, find an illustrator that you think will match your needs, and there's also a bidding process where you can put a project up and ask people to submit bids. And it's really, they're first-class illustrators out there. They also have an image bank that you can search for images that illustrators will give you a one-time use for a small fee, or like I said, if you approach them and you don't have a budget but you have a cause, or you want to promote their work, you can also oftentimes use them. So I'll write those. Oh,
is that correct? Yeah, that's right.
Why don't we throw a keyword of something up there just to see if the search brings back? The quality on this site is amazing. Anybody want to throw one out?
Try to bite.
Try to bite. I gave mine are all horribly inaccurate.
My experience is totally different. I mean, coming from an institution, I guess, that has a long history in Boston, but we get a lot of photographers that approach us to say, oh my gosh, I was there the other day, we took all these fantastic pictures, you know, and they give us their pictures, which is great for us, but I can't imagine that it would be the experience of most people, because, and it's also very easy to get pictures of cool sea dragons and whatnot, so.
It's interesting. I don't know if you guys have how into the image rights world you all have dived. Dove in, yeah, right. But Wired Magazine recently released all of its images into the under a Creative Commons license for non-commercial use as long as you link back to their site. So the currency is no longer money, it's links, and which bumps their articles up in the search engines and secures them, at the top of Google's magic formula for page rank. It's an interesting thing to note as an image creator that links have value to this big company that's pumping out content constantly. It's a good thing to know as a blogger who's interested in using images that you see on any of Wired's posts. If you're okay with linking back to them, their images are available.
The fascinating thing I found with the way Wired has done it, because this is sort of a new phenomenon for a big network to basically, do that. I mean, you think of some of those major institutional magazines like that, like National Geographic or something, just saying, oh yeah, go ahead.
So
Just link back to
are
us.
available, but are they cataloged? Like you can't really search them, right? It's just looking back and seeing stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if they
I
got to
don't
that
think they
point.
made a particular catalog, but at the same time, the thing that I found fascinating with it as a creator was that when I checked out a couple of Wired's posts, they will often credit the photographer or the artist, but they don't actually even put a link to those guys on the sites. Because like most, like any photographer or artist, they have a website portfolio of their own as well. But I think I looked up something named John Snyder, and a quick Google search, I found him. But I thought it was really sort of I think some of that's still shaking out too, though. Wired's just launched this, but it doesn't mean it's the answer to everything either. So it's just as publishing, as you're saying, just as publishing is in flux. For writers, it's hugely in flux for artists as well, because image creators are in the same boat. So it's there's no good paradigm to make money doing it right now. Yet it also, like writing, takes years of practice and skill and attention to the craft of making these things to do it well and effectively. So
one of the problems I see with I went into it practically, but I think the general thing is what is non-commercial.
I know.
Because of course, you're for example, American or
everybody here rolling?
No.
Just talking about what is
what is
the definition of what is non-commercial.
In particular with Creative Commons, it's like I was working for. We had this collaborative blog. We had the policy to use images, of course, to use them correctly. But there was advertising on the page, and at the end we could actually afford to pay people some small fee, not necessarily anywhere close to being profitable, but it's just nice to. So in principle, there's a commercial background. So are we non-commercial or not? And I think there's a lot of this is quite a bit in flux, because also many of the things that start small as blogs become big, they're successful, and then they turn into something people make their living out of it.
We had that debate with Scientific American as well.
What's your point of view?
I think the safest thing is always just email the image creator.
Yeah.
And I know it's muddy waters and it's really irritating. But if we're making a list of best practices, always please put the image creator's name somewhere visible, and preferably right next to the image. If you have the skills, pull it into Photoshop, write their name on white space underneath the image, and then use that in your post instead. So that if somebody right-clicks that image, then the illustrator's name or the image maker's name is right there with it no matter what, unless somebody takes the time to crop it out, which I can guarantee you they're not going to do. The other thing is naming your files. Name them with the last name of the image maker in the file, because that is, if they right-click and save it and they don't rename it, people are constantly pulling images that they like off onto their own computer, and that falls under, in my opinion, fair use. They're just like, oh, I love this, cool, and they save it, they're not going to put it on a t-shirt. They're just like, we're pack rats, like by nature. We like to collect things that we like. But then, if they go back and they're going through a folder of their cool images, and they see something that they like, and there's no trace back to, oh gosh, I can't even remember where I got that. Even if they're the most well-meaning person, they can't trace back to the illustrator or image maker. But if you name your files with the last name, or the name of the image maker in it, then that's another way that you can always link back. And it just, there are these little things that you can do to try and keep the image maker together with their image, so that they're findable. I mean, anyone can, like, I agree that with Wired, most magazines don't link back to the original creator, even if they list their name, but a 2-second Google search.
But they will have a bio for the writer.
Fine.
They will put a bio for the writer that, will link back to their site.
Yeah, and
there's a whole sort of hierarchy thing that happens sometimes there.
But anyways, we can all Google. If the name is there, that's, in my opinion, good. A step forward in the right direction.
I came in late, so I don't know if we talked about this, but another, scientists themselves, of course, are often the sources of pictures, and I'm talking about documenting pictures more than photography. But in my experience, the richest thing is PowerPoints is that someone's giving a talk on a subject, and they often will send you all the slides, and they're doing a really nice thing that they'd love to have used. It's just because they give this talk over and over again. And sometimes you just get a slide deck, you've got 4 images there that the scientist is happy to use. It's very un-internet to actually email the person and say, send me a slide deck. But they're often very pleased to have things explained properly by your
Actually, the thing about that, though, is that sometimes when people put PowerPoint presentations together, they're pulling stuff up from the web.
Oh, yeah, so it's very important. It's very important to say, send me only your images.
Yeah, right.
They can't violate rights by somebody else's.
Right, because the rules for what you can show in PowerPoint, in Congress, what you can put on the web.
Right, so, yeah.
I think a main message I sort of hope is clear is, copyright, if it comes to some of these things might seem murky, and they can be, because again, things change very quickly, and we haven't found a best practice for everybody yet. So the easiest way to sort of cover your ass when you're putting up a post and you're taking an image is just talk to the person who made it. In one of the other sessions I was pointing out, is everybody familiar with Google reverse image search? A few people, anybody heard of that? They sort of quietly launched it a little while ago. It's if you have a window open and you open up a Google image search in another window, you can drag the image over and pop it into the search box where you usually put text, and it will find that image and similar images like that. There's also another company called tineye.com, TINYE.com. And what they're doing is they're trying to catalog every image they can get their hands on online. They add, I think, millions every month. And they create a digital fingerprint of the images. And the way their technology works is even if the image is converted to black and white by somebody who swiped it and converted it to black and white, or it's mirror image flipped, they can still identify the original source of the image. And so if you are looking at images and you're not sure if the other blog that you want to grab it from or something is the creator, these are 2 really fast tools. Like these are not a large time-consuming thing. This can take you just a quick couple of minutes, and it helps you to very quickly identify who the original creator is. And it's a fascinating time right now for those of you who do take your own photos and images in your blogs, because now you can see who all the people are who used it that you weren't even aware of. That they changed the name of the file, they've done something different to the image, and you can see, not that you want to spend all your time hunting down violators or anything, but one artist that I know who does a lot of dinosaur imagery found out there was a company selling posters where they had collected dozens and dozens of his dinosaurs and he put them up, and they were selling posters, and and that's a clear violation. It's one thing to put them up and not credit them. It's kind of a jerk move, but it's another thing entirely to start profiting from them. So, but these are things that you can, if you are an image creator, or if you're somebody who wants to use an image, it's a very easy tool. Just to do that.
I've got a good story about that.
Yeah.
A friend of mine found a picture online. He wanted to use it in a blog post, but couldn't find the creator. And what he had found was a motivational poster with an image in it of Aquaman riding Cthulhu. I put that into Google image search, and found that it was everywhere. Everybody was using it. Everybody had posted on their blog. Nobody had credited it to anyone. I eventually tracked it down to, and this is all with Google reverse image search. I managed to get a similar image that was not cropped and not in a motivational poster, and then started going backwards in time, seeing what the earliest occurrence of that was, and eventually got it back to DeviantArt, found the artist, found the original image that, when uncropped, actually had his signature on it. Somebody had actually cropped out the guy's signature. But Google image search did find it for me. So it's very powerful.
Good for you.
There are times where it doesn't work in some instances. I mean, it's incredibly powerful and it's getting better all the time. This is still a relatively new engine, but I had a similar instance where there's this tremendously cool painting of this sort of Mediterranean-looking island, and you can see under the water it's sort of a bay. And the island in the middle of this bay was a giant octopus in the painting, basically. So you had this like houses on its head, or whatever all this thing that is called. And so you know, very, very cool image. And there was no visible signature anywhere on it. And it had been used by a few sites, and I put it into tineye.com and just got a few results back. I put it on Google reverse image search, didn't have any luck. So one of the things I was complaining about was that, not to go off on a Tumblr tangent, but I'll just say quickly, one of the problems I have with the way many people use Tumblr is Tumblr actually has a spot where you can put the original link back. If you're putting an image, you can put the link back so that every time that gets reshared, on Tumblr you can just hit a reshare button and it quickly gets reshared. And sometimes they'll get reshared thousands of times if they're popular, like Aquaman riding Cthulhu. If you bother to put in the attribution link, that will follow it. But most people don't bother to fill that in because it's not mandatory, and so it doesn't follow it. And so then you very quickly lose who have done these images. And that's where I saw this cephalopod island thing. And I wasn't having any luck with searches. It was driving me bonkers. Somebody's uploaded this fantastic, what looked like an oil painting, incredibly realistic detail and everything. So in frustration, I just went on Flying Trial Bed on my blog and posted the image again and said, does anybody know who made this really cool thing? Sometimes you can sort of find the author of an orphan image like that. And literally 8 hours later, one of my readers, it's from the CD liner notes of an Italian opera CD or something like it. It was the artist's name is such and such, and his website. And it was it was one of those things where and that's something that we have a site called Art Evolved that's a paleo art site. And a few times it's come up. The other administrators and I have wrangled over. Sometimes they like to put up images that they don't know who made it, and it drives me bonkers when they do it. So now when they do it, they always put an appeal to the paleo art community is very, like, there's a rabid fan base for people who make dinosaur images, and so often if they do put up one, it's less than a day they can figure out who made the thing. Yeah.
So I'm curious to know how you all think about when you write your content, either as scientists or writers or communicators, and then start to think about images and how to enhance what you're saying. In other words, rather than just sort of default to fill a space or to add color or whatever, to really further communicate in sort of a sophisticated or interesting way what you're already saying. So how do you think that through? And I know Emily, you as a communicator, you're probably doing that all the time. So I would just like to hear.
I mean, what I tell the bloggers on our end, I almost say get your pictures first, and then you can fill in the blanks. And you might be talking about what images you were able to get and expand on what the people are able to see, and then fill in text about what you were able to get on camera, because animals don't always behave like you want them to. But it's something that I encourage our bloggers to do, is start with your pictures, if possible. And that might be, for them, it's like taking a camera into the first exhibit, but it might be for doing a search online to see what images are out there that you're able to use or you're able to get permission to use, and then kind of fill in from there. But, it's hard to say that. It might be easier said than done if you have kind of an abstract thing of yourself.
Somebody should tweet that, though. Get your images first. then writing.
See, that works great for something like that, but the way I tend to write things is I'll be writing and I'll get to a point where I want to put an image, and I'll just write myself a note. I need an image that tells this part of the story for me, because it's way easier than trying to explain it in words, like sometimes bizarre selling like thing or whatever. So, definitely finding images versus valuable in that kind of situation, but if you know exactly what you're trying to say, you just need to illustrate it.
Yeah, if I could make a little comment here. One thing that I think is important to mention is that before anybody reads your blogs, they see your blog. When they type in the URL and it pops up on their screen, they're going to see it before they read it. And I think it's important that us as an online community, we begin to really think of what we're doing as important enough that it should be smart and it should be beautiful at the same time. I said this in an earlier, earlier in the weekend here, but I think that you can make the argument that online publishing and e-publishing is very much the present, and I think what we're doing is really on the forefront of that. And I think we have a responsibility to mimic what's been done in print for so long, because there's a reason it's been done that way. And I think we have a responsibility to make these posts look beautiful and not have these images become an afterthought. And I've only been publishing my work online for the last 6 months, but I'm baffled by the amount of emails that I get from people who like what they saw, but always start the email with, "I saw your image on such and such, here's a link, don't know if you've seen it yet." And that blows my mind that the culture is such that people think that it's okay that my work might be somewhere that I didn't know it was. I don't think that's I don't think that that's really an appropriate way of let's call it doing business, regardless of whether or not there's financial reward in it yet, because there will be eventually. And I think that again, it's all of our responsibility to really set that bar high. Now, of course, it's easy for me to say as a person who makes images for a living. I want all of you to use my images. But but really, what I'm talking about is the integrity of the content that we're putting out. there. There's a reason why the New Yorker uses illustrations. There's a reason why they're called illustrations, because they're illustrating a point. An illustration, or even a photograph used in an editorial context, is like a 1-second silent film. It tells in 1 second a story, and it communicates to your reader who's first looking at your blog and then saying, "That's what this is about, let me read it." An illustration or a photograph is almost a advertisement for what it is you're writing. And I think in the example Glendon said, where it was about you should be vaccinated, but then showing scary needles, that doesn't make sense, and that's what happens when images are an afterthought. So obviously I'm just putting it in the air that we should all, as a community, really strive to make our blog posts and all of our e-publishing as beautiful and as relevant as anything that's been done in print for the last century.
We can't necessarily put the genie back in the bottle on the way that most people use the internet. And I think that's why, more and more artists are adapting, and there's always going to be a certain level of low-grade, reshared, spiked image piracy. But one of the things that I find really fascinating is in the science blogging community, the science blogs that get popular quickly, one of the sort of hallmarks that they share is they tend to cite the papers they're talking about. They're not just, "Oh yeah, in my opinion, this is the way it is." They're addressing real research and sharing it with people in an informative, communicative way, either to a small community or to the public at large. And one of the things that, as an image creator, that I find really funny though, is that very often, not all the time, but often, science bloggers don't necessarily actually do the same thing with their images. So there's this beautiful little bibliography of the papers, and then there's a bunch of images that you have no idea where they got from. So I went on a rant about it about a year ago, a little over a year ago, and then I decided to sort of check. And this is an incredibly small sample size. If anybody's statistics, you'll probably want to, your head's going to explode. But it's I went to does anybody know scienceblogging.org? It's the big aggregate site that aggregates all the aggregators or all the networks. And I looked at the first, I don't know what is it there, about 10 or 12 networks that were at the top of the page. During one, sorry? Yeah, I'll try to see if I can get that a little bigger. I don't know how legible it's going to be. Okay, so, incredibly small sample size, but even this took me longer than I was planning on spending on it. But I just wanted to sort of get a rough idea. And so I was looking at, and this is from quite a long time ago, and it was a snapshot sort of at noon of whatever. On scienceblogging.org, they have the headlines from the 5 most recent blog posts on that network. So what I did was I went to each of those 5 and took a look to see who was using images and how did they link to them, how did they cite them, how did they contribute to things. So scienceblogs.com, it just so happened at that time, which is really funny because it's actually quite an image-driven site a lot of the time. None of the posts that were in the most recent 5 had any images at all. We don't have to go down through the whole list. I'm currently on Scientific American. This is before that, but just to have a look, let's look at that then. So out of the 5 had images. There was 5 images, so there's 1 image per post. How many linked only to the site where it was found? Like just maybe said image with a link on the word image. So 2 of them did that. How many had a name or a source only but with no link? And 3 of them had that. So at the time, it was something that none of the I'll just pick on my own where I work now. None of them, in my opinion, were linked to correctly. I would put that in the green bar here as being linked with the person's name. With the creator's name. They didn't have any that were unsighted altogether. You could find the information. You could follow the link back, or at least you have the name, or whatever. But I was looking through the whole thing, and so the green is the good. And there were some very good ones. Wired, look, they were doing the job, all that kind of thing. And there wasn't maybe as many that were completely unsighted as I had perceived there to be. But it's something that over time would be an interesting thing to look at, And again, it is interesting to me sometimes that when I'm looking at researchers' blogs and they've got 3 papers cited down at the bottom and random images of whatever. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Excuse me, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Many of the illustrators here thought about working with the altmetrics people that were here and gave a talk, I think yesterday. That's how you could better integrate your images into getting citations and getting more visibility, probably trying to get over this whole problem of...
I did miss that session, so...
This would be the ideal opportunity where the people trying to figure out citations for online stuff, right? Whether that's figures, slides, whatever. Why can't you just link your illustrations into that too?
Okay, I'll have to look that up. Is it a way of... Is it like a database of...
I think they're capturing all of the things that are out there based on a DOI or whatever else, right? Where you have slideshow accounts, stuff that you put out there, and then linking that back and seeing where it's been cited and capturing all your metrics.
Okay.
I was part of that session. I think it's sort of easier way to work for images is just to use the link shortcuts because they also track how many times it has been clicked, and that's much easier than this whole metrics business of connecting all kinds of things together.
That was something I learned yesterday. I didn't realize that the link shorteners were doing that. If anybody's not aware of it, some of the like Bitly and so on, they when they shorten the link, you can basically create a custom one. And if you embed that, there is an easy way when you're blogging for the artists here that you can change. Automatically, often it'll enlarge. You can change where that enlarging link is to something else. So if you did change it, then people were copying the image URL. Yeah, you can go to a site like Bitly and then track how many times that image has cropped up or been linked to or clicked on. That was new information to me yesterday for sure. Yeah, it was nice to find out, because that's been sort of in my opinion, sort of a holy grail for a lot of artists. Is how is there a way to, other than putting your name and your URL on the actual image, how is there a way to have that information go with the image every time it gets right-clicked and put somewhere? And does anybody here who's an artist, does anybody here disable right-clicking on their images on any sites? Just out of curiosity. There's a lot of artists who do, but it's less and less now. It's not sort of there's a bunch of reasons why it's not the greatest practice. We don't have to go into it, but it's a certain amount of sharing is necessary to get it to work. Basically, is the short answer.
How long is this supposed to go? Is there anything that we haven't covered that we want to dive into in the next couple of minutes?
Just as an image resource. I don't know how many. This is probably something that is maybe not of value to everybody, but for photographs of certain kinds of things, government agencies can be a fantastic resource. I did a story recently where I found a whole bunch of images through the Department of Agriculture. And if you need something that is not, that's not very, very specific, and sometimes even if you do, you can usually find really, really good options, and those are available for the public to use.
Yeah, NASA.
NASA, you can spend months and months and months just going through all of the different, subpages of that.
But I would just like to throw out there a word of caution. It does pay to read the rights. When you scroll down to the bottom of a web page, any organization has the teeny tiny print of contact us, jobs, rights, site licenses. Read those, because I just found out recently that although NASA's images are all released into the public domain, if there is another image creator credited there, you have to follow their guidelines too. So that it'll often say NASA JPL, or it'll say NASA EOS, European Science ESA, European Science, or thank you, ESO.
Pretty much whenever you go to download it, whatever whichever quality, whichever version that you want, they always have a full list there, and this is how it should be credited. So it's that information.
Right. But for example, I was just doing some image rights research for a book that I'm helping out on, and there was the NASA ESO logo. If I were doing it for a blog, I would think, okay, yeah, I could definitely just use those and credit them, right? For a print publication, I had to follow the ESO's guidelines because they were stricter. So it's important to just, do your homework, get your bases covered. The last thing you want is somebody, calling you up with some angry lawyer email, threatening to take down your site. Or, just like, we want good things.
Yeah, another, this afternoon, just to do a plug for another session as well, Daniel and I are going to be talking about the personal nature of, as a scientist, if you want art made for a blog or a tattoo, or like in the past I've done some blog banners for people's science blogs, and we're going to be talking about sort of the personal nature of what it's like to actually work with somebody and talk about contracts and things like that. So it's sort of from a different angle than the wider use of being effective in your communication. But another resource that I'm going to mention there as well, that you can find either on Symbiotic in our small little blog roll there, or you can find on my site, The Flying Trilobite. For scienceblogging.org, for that aggregator, I've been maintaining a feed, the Science Artists feed, that is currently has well over 100 science art blogs that every time they update it, it goes into that feed. And appears on scienceblogging.org as well. And so it's if you're sort of looking for general stuff, or even just for the fun of looking through things, there's over 100 different artist blogs. The people in this room, and I try to be fairly open with who's on there. So some are photographers, some are doing cartoons, some are painters, fine artists, scientific illustrators. It runs the gamut. So there's a lot of really talented people on there, and they're already blogging. So it's very approachable. I find when they're already dealing with the same issues of writing and everything else in communication that you are. So it's a great way to contact somebody and start developing a relationship there too.
I'd also suggest, if you haven't done this yet, is to check out Google's Guide to Search Engine Optimization. It's just a real basic guide on how to optimize your images to come up for image search. So anything from how you should create your file names to the metadata that you associate with the image, the titles, the alternative text attributes, and also if you have access to a created sitemap for your website, which lists all the images and all their associated metadata so that Google knows exactly what images it should be pulling from your website and surfacing for certain queries. And it's a really easy guide to follow.
That reminds me, are there image creators here who are interested? I have an interesting Photoshop point, but if there are image creators here, I won't bother. We've got a couple. You can, I think it's called metadata, when you embed this information in the actual file. In Photoshop, if you go to File, under File and Document Info, or File Info, I can't remember, you can set the copyright to you, so that information is never unmarried from your file. And it's interesting. Well, yeah, I know. There are always ways, but for your average user who's going to, right-click it and throw it on somewhere, without your permission, it's there. And it's an important step to take because there are some laws that are kind of lurking in the background. One called the Orphan Works legislation that is being nefarious people are trying to pass this law that would basically change U.S. copyright law as we know it now, so that you would no longer have the privilege of when you create something, you own the copyright. You would actually have to register it to own the copyright. So that that law would overturn how many years? 70 or 100 years of copyright.
Yeah, the Berne
No,
Convention's
that's not
old,
true.
isn't it?
30 years. In the 70s?
It was updated, but the Berne
78, yeah,
Convention's quite old.
Anyway, just so you know, that's a little tidbit you can do to it probably also helps in the Google search optimization as well. Other than your information is in that mode.
Also, so if people are using Google to just kind of gather images, there's a new site called Pinterest. It's a pinboard which I found really, really helpful because what you can do is you can create these pinboards and you can basically just it's like a shortboard where you just put the images up there, but it links back directly to where you found it. So rather than saving an image to your desktop or trying to figure out yourself how to remember where it is that you saw that image, if you're just trying to get ideas together or things that you think you might actually want to use later, this is a way that will, it's like when you go back to look at your corkboard, it'll send you back to where you found that site. Yeah, that's it.
We haven't spent time talking about some of the ins and outs of optimizing an image for online. There's a number of guides online. We can add to the wiki later on if people are interested. We can add a couple of those. I've written a couple of short ones myself, because you don't want to have one that takes forever to load, and there's resizing, and there's all these different things. And there's some free tools out there. You don't have to spend $700 on Photoshop to do it. I'll mention one quickly for anybody who's interested in manipulating an image, whether it's painting one, enhancing a photo, or whatever it is. Gimp.org, shareware file, does almost everything Photoshop can do, and it's a great way to compress your images. Great tool to help compress your images down. Any other comments, questions? Did we cover everything? Should we play the death metal and the strobe light? Yeah. If anybody wants, I brought some very colorful, different business cards. And I'm very open to, and the reason for that, if you wanted to email me about questions related to the stuff that we talked about, something you don't recall later, I'm happy to answer it, or give you some tips on optimizing your image using software, or I'm always happy to help with that. So, yeah.